On this episode of 340 Banter, we are on site at the 340B Midwest Regional Conference, and we're here with Madeline Wallack, partner at RXX Consulting. Madeline, thanks for joining us. I think today we're going to talk about some of the recent manufacturer audits we've seen approved by HRSA.
Yes, thanks so much for having me, both of you. Honored to be here. I wanted to talk about this topic because just in the last couple weeks, we've seen inquiries from manufacturers going to covered entities that are catching covered entities by surprise. And when you have gone through the good faith process, you shouldn't be surprised. You should be fully aware of what the circumstances involve, who the manufacturer is, what they're looking for, and maybe things have gone sideways and now you're getting a HRSA-approved manufacturer audit.
I think before we get any further, let's back up and explain how those audits get started.
Typically,
Yes.
if
Yeah.
everything goes right.
So typically the process is that a manufacturer, if they are noting different issues with um, increases in purchases or maybe variability across two different accounts that they're not expecting. Like if it's in a hospital with a mixed use drug, if it's 50-50 inpatient, outpatient, and all of a sudden they're seeing 100% at 340B, that might flag some questions. And so typically what we see is an outreach from the drug manufacturer directly to the covered entity with an opportunity to investigate and explain. And so
And that's what we would call a good faith inquiry.
yes, and that can go back and forth, and that can take, anywhere from 3 to 6 months. It can go on, but there is an interest for both parties to do so. Doing a full audit is expensive for a manufacturer, and it's really burdensome for a covered entity. So being responsive to these good faith inquiries is really advisable.
Yeah.
And HRSA expects it.
Right. And there is a regulation, right? That at least it's at minimum it's a guidance that says that the manufacturers have to do good faith inquiries prior to an audit being approved.
Right. And it's part of what the manufacturer uses to show reasonable cause for having the audit approved. And so if you haven't had any back and forth, you have to it's harder to prove your case to HRSA to get this approved. But it really is, like I said before, it's in everybody's best interest to try to resolve issues. Sometimes the manufacturer doesn't have insight to what's going on and they're guessing. And so this would be an opportunity for that entity to, explain without the pain of going through a big data request.
And it's a lot of times these good faith inquiries really resolve themselves. It's like you said, the manufacturer doesn't know, so they're trying to get some more information, and it's a good thing for covered entities to work with the manufacturers on these.
There can be valid reasons for an anomaly to occur, and then once that's explained, it can be resolved. But Madeline, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing right now?
Yeah, so in the last couple weeks, we have seen a big increase in the number of HRSA-approved manufacturer audits. So I've been in this space for a really long time. The last manufacturer audit I was a part of was in 2014, and it was just one-off. And it was actually kind of a bigger issue that was going on with this particular covered entity. And so it was appropriate, and they worked it out. But I hadn't seen any for, over 10 years get approved, and now we're seeing several. I had 2 clients last week get notifications. Neither one of them have any sort of good faith inquiry going on. So they don't feel like they've been contacted at all. So it was quite a surprise.
Yeah, that would be very surprising. So the regulation that I was thinking of would be the administrative dispute resolution process, where it actually walks through that the manufacturers do need to go through the good faith inquiry prior to doing their audit, and then they can enter the administrative dispute or ADR process. And so that's a very key step that would be missing because you should not be surprised by a manufacturer audit.
Absolutely. You should be fully aware that you've reached an impasse And that's why this next step has been, kind of
And
ignited.
in fact, sometimes these good faith inquiries actually let the covered entity know that there was a problem that they weren't aware of.
Sure.
I just had a client go through one a few weeks ago, and they realized that they their modifiers, their pharmacy software had dropped the modifiers for a few weeks.
Yeah.
So they are working in good faith with the manufacturer to fix those claims, and then they're repaying the others that they can't fix. So it's a good thing. It's supposed to be a back and forth, but it is concerning if there is no indication of why that audit got approved without the inquiry.
Sure. Yeah. It should be a partnership. It should be, both sides working together because of issues just like what you said, Logan. Like if there are, glitches in your technology that you're not anticipating, they may see it first. And so it could be a welcome,
Yes.
bit of information to get things back on track. Um, But I think that, with this good faith inquiry, again, it's not a technical requirement that you resolve things through good faith, but it has been the expectation and it is part of this body of evidence that you have to present when you're showing reasonable cause to HRSA.
Hmm.
So it's something that's really important. And I think what I've been wondering recently is what HRSA is accepting as evidence of good faith.
Hmm.
So
And
if I have a client that says, I don't have any clue what this is about, where else might it be coming from?
yeah, and we just had a case dismissed recently with 5 hospitals that sued HRSA and HHS over Johnson and Johnson audits that HRSA had, with the covered entities, felt prematurely approved those audits, and they were asking similar questions, right? What was going into leading to the approval of these manufacturer audits? Ultimately, that was dismissed, and so we are seeing, I think, what we would consider to be a much shorter timeline to approval. And I think it would be very helpful for the stakeholders in the 340B community to have a better idea of this, right? Because like you said, we shouldn't be caught unaware. And if something else is now constituting good faith, where previously it had been a back and forth between the manufacturer and the covered entity, it's really important for us to understand that, right? We do know that there are a lot of places where data is shared, right? Whether that is from the payers like Medicaid going to the manufacturers. We also have data submissions through groups like Second Sight and 340B ESP. And, coming up, we'll have the rebate models where we're sharing
And
information
even
there.
pharmacy benefit managers through
Mhm.
modifier use.
Yeah. And so that's something that as I've heard more and more about these types of situations where the covered entity is not perceiving that they're involved in a good faith inquiry, curious if those types of other data sharing platforms that are not being perceived for this functionality may be the justification that the manufacturers are using for good faith, but we won't know that, right? That is purely speculative. We won't know that until we get more information from Office of
And
Pharmacy
I
Affairs.
guess this is something I don't know is does the covered entity, when they're chosen for a manufacturer audit, do they have the right to get that information from rehearsal? What was the evidence that led to that approval?
It's such a good segue, Logan, because that's something that's really irritating me right now.
Yeah.
The entities don't have the right to this. So right now, the information that's submitted by the manufacturer, as well as the approved audit work plan, that is all kept confidential from the covered entity. Yeah. So right now, your only recourse as the covered entity who's subject to this is to FOIA, so to submit a Freedom of Information Act to the government to get this information. Big problems there. Number one, FOIA requests,
Take
I'd say
years.
minimum is 18 months.
Yeah.
So, and that's a big process and it can be really costly. I submitted a FOIA request for something a couple years ago and they just got back to me 2 years later and wanted to charge $2,500 for some paperwork. I was
Yeah.
like,
Thank
I
you.
don't think so. But in addition to that burden, one of the big problems is if the manufacturer is supposed to be following GAGA standards, generally acceptable government accounting standards, which is something that I had to learn at the IG's office where I used to work, there has to be a work plan that says, here's my objective, here's what the problem is, here's what data I'm going to collect to answer that question. So if you can't see the work plan as a covered entity, if you don't know what they've been approved to look at, you can't monitor whether they're following these standardized practices for auditing.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's a big problem.
it is, and it feels in the era of transparency, which is what I'm describing where we live right now in 340B, right? It feels unjust.
Yes.
Is the best word to describe it. That yes, we are all here for transparency. We are willing to participate in these audits, but we should know the standard that we are being held to and what has been approved for the manufacturers and so that we can all participate fairly. I know that previous audits that we've seen that have been done by manufacturers, it has felt like there's been a scope creep. It has felt like they have been broad and
Well,
overreaching, even for what the statute
elements
would
even
approve.
beyond what we would see in a general HRSA OPA audit. We've additional breadth that they're allowed to evaluate.
Timeframes that are going beyond what's in the ADR timeframe, which is 3 years. And so I think that, you know, as given everything that's happening in the space, given the restrictions, given the rebates, given all of the give that we have on the covered entity side, right? It makes sense for the manufacturer audit plans to be made transparent to the covered entities. There are other places where we're seeing lack of transparency too. Manufacturer effectuation plans for the Medicare transaction
Yes.
facilitator, another point of frustration, right? We're being asked to operate in the space of transparency, but so little transparency coming back to us.
And
Right.
it's hard to be compliant when you don't know the rules.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's just hard to prepare if you don't know what you're being audited for. So if you're in a situation where you don't feel like you've received any good faith inquiry, they're coming in and asking, manufacturers are coming in and asking for lots of information. And it's hard to figure out, is this a fishing expedition or is there a particular thing they're looking for? Or is it like kind of like a Trojan horse, right? Where they're going to ask for everything knowing what they're looking for, but go through the motions of having it be more broad. But if you're a covered entity who is facing perhaps a duplicate discount issue, then questions about, inventory management and procurement and diversion, not like they're not relevant, but that's not what the scope is that you're approved up for
Yeah.
from HRSA. So I think there has to be limitations, and covered entities need to go into this knowing what the problem is.
So, as we wrap up, what advice would you give to covered entities in dealing with good faith inquiries and if they were to get a HRSA audit
Manufacturer
or
audit.
manufacturer audit? Sorry.
HRSA approved manufacturer
Yes,
audit.
there you go.
So first, I would say you have to have your right team together. Do not try to handle this on your own, meaning if the letter is directed to the 340B director, primary contact, make sure you've assembled your team of your attorneys, your, AO, the whole team. If you use consultants, please call them and use them. They know your program well and they can help coach you through this. This is not dealing with a HRSA audit. This is a very specific stakeholder that you need to have someone with experience in navigating. There are specific timelines you have to adhere to. I would recommend looking at the guidance and the regulation that's out there so that you know what your rights are. But I would also start off with, if you're confused about what the audit's about, ask.
Yeah.
I would just email right back and say, I don't think we've had the opportunity to engage in good faith. Can we try to go that route first? That's kind of one of my big recommendations. But also, it doesn't hurt to say, I'd like to know what the work plan is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll have some more information about this soon.
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.